Hello again. Thanks for tuning in. You are going to be listening to a presentation from Krista Berry entitled Work-Life Balance for Entrepreneurs: How to Build a Successful Business on Your Terms. Krista is going to emphasize how to stop sacrificing your health and happiness to get and stay ahead, as she enthusiastically explains how to build a business on your own terms. And now a little bit about Krista. Krista is a dynamic keynote speaker and author of the book Beautiful Badass: How to Believe in Yourself Against the Odds. And she's the founder of She Goes High, a 1,000 plus member Northern Colorado women's leadership community for introverts. She's presented at Ignite Denver, Boulder and Fort Collins Startup Weeks, Northern Colorado Women's Small Business Conference, General Assembly Denver, Polka Dot Powerhouse Celebration, Aurora Chamber of Commerce Women in Business, and more than 100 other events and organizations. She is a 2016 and 2017 participant and facilitator of Larimer County Women of the Year program, and her book shares stories and lessons about overcoming poverty and depression. It's a guide for women who want to take command of their destinies and no longer fall prey to the hardships and setbacks that previously defined them. My name is Valerie Eastman, and I'm the founder and CEO of Winter Winds Robotics, and I'm a Longmont startup superfan, and I will be here with Krista as she presents to you today. Krista?
Well, welcome and thanks so much for having me, and welcome to all of our audience that is tuning in live. So this is a live presentation, and throughout this presentation, I want this to be really actionable and relevant to you. And what does that mean since you're watching virtually? That means please do use the chat and the Q&A to interact, to ask questions, to make, if you get an aha moment, share that. We'd love to hear it. I'll be referring back to Valerie throughout the presentation. And that really helps me tailor the stories and examples that I share and make this really relevant for you, because that is so important to me that you get something out of this session today. And so we're going to be talking about work-life balance and what that really means. And so something that I hear from a lot of entrepreneurs, and myself being an entrepreneur, when many of us think about a goal we're trying to achieve, let's use the example of generating more revenue in our business. So when we think about this goal that we're looking to achieve, generating more revenue, most of us, when we start to think about how we're going to do that, we think about doing more. We think about giving more, contributing more, right? If you want more money, you need to do more, give more, be more. But I don't believe that's true. So I'm going to start off today by telling you a little story about a career coaching client I worked with many years ago in the very beginning of my business. Now, this woman was not an entrepreneur, but her story still applies. So this woman came to me, and she had been working in the marketing field for some time and was just feeling like it was hard for her to get ahead financially. She just wasn't making the money that she wanted to make. She was paying her basic bills, maybe taking a modest vacation every year or every other year, but not ever really feeling like she was getting ahead. Maybe you can relate. I know I certainly can, and I've been there many times, especially as an entrepreneur with the ups and downs. Sometimes we get in that place. And so this woman, like many of us, what she thought was, okay, I'm not making the money that I want to make. So here's my great idea. I'm going to go back to school and get a second bachelor's degree in marketing. So her first degree was in some other field. I don't even remember what it was. But she had this thought that if she had a degree in marketing, which was the field she was working in, that she would be able to command a higher salary. And fortunately for her, we had this consultation before she invested a lot of money and a lot of time in getting a second degree. And it was pretty clear to me in our initial conversation that the reason she wasn't making more money had nothing to do with whether or not she had a specific marketing degree, because she was already providing this amazing value through the work that she did, and she just wasn't getting paid for it. And in your business, I'm guessing that that is probably true for you too. You are probably providing an incredible value. And if you are not hitting the income goals that you want to hit, chances are it's not because you need to do more or be more. So this woman, instead of going back to school and getting a degree in marketing, she worked with me for about 3 months, and she turned around and she got a $10,000 a year raise. And I'll never forget what she said to me when I asked her how it went. I knew she had this call scheduled with her boss, and I said, "How did it go?" And she said, "It was so easy. I realized I could have asked for even more," which was awesome, an awesome win. And then the following year, she got another very significant raise. And here's the thing, you might be thinking that what I worked with her in our coaching on was, some kind of negotiation techniques, some kind of strategies around getting that raise. It was not. Most of the work that we did is very similar to the 3 main tips that I'm going to share with you today. And what it is about, it's about working smarter, not harder. It's about focusing your efforts where you can have the biggest impact. And it's also about owning and stepping into your own value in a different way. Because the more you value yourself, the more other people value you. And that means they're more likely to pay more for the service or product you're already providing. Not that you're working harder or going out and getting that other certification, right? I see this in service providers specifically a lot, that they go out and it's like, well, I'm going to go and get this other certification. And so now I'm going to have this additional modality that I can serve my clients with. Now, maybe if you want to go and learn about that modality because you love learning and because you think it would be fun, go for it. But chances are that's not what you need to do if your goal happens to be to increase your income. And maybe you have a different goal entirely, but the tips I'm going to share with you, I think are still going to apply. But I want to start you off with this idea, just like that client I worked with, who thought that in order to make more money, she needed to do more, be more. She needed some external justification for asking for a raise. That's what she thought, but that's not actually what she needed to do. And so I want you to go into this session today, and I want you to know that you do enough and you are enough. You do enough, you are enough. There is nothing more that you need to say, do, to reach whatever goals that you have in place for yourself. All right, hopefully y'all are on board with me so far. So we're going to dive right in, and I'm going to tell you the first tip that I have for you around not only having better work-life balance in your life, in your business, but really getting clarity for yourself on how you're going to spend your day. What activities are most important? So the first tip that I have for you is to use the 80-20 rule in your business. So you may have heard of the 80-20 rule. It's also sometimes referred to as the Pareto principle. And it stems from this idea that 80% of your results will come from 20% of your efforts in your business. So 20% of your actions, of your to-dos, of those things that you're working on will yield 80% of the results. Now, your numbers may vary slightly, but let's just say that this is true. Let's say that 20% of what you're doing in your business will get you 80% of your results. So what I want you to do is to use this 80-20 rule in your business and get really clear on what is that 20% that's getting you 80% of your results. Really focus on that 20% instead of trying to do all the things. Now, one way that we see this showing up for entrepreneurs is marketing. In marketing, a lot of times entrepreneurs think that they have to employ any and every new hot marketing strategy, especially if they see it working for someone else. They're like, oh, I should really do webinars. I should really do masterclasses. The name is always changing, but it's pretty much the same thing, right? Oh, Facebook ads. Oh, I should be doing speaking. Oh, I should write a book, right? Like there's tons of great marketing strategies to employ in your business. And we can really spread ourselves thin by thinking, I have to do all of them, or whatever the hot one is, I should jump on that. But I would say, really take a look at your business and who your customers are. And what is that 20% that's going to get you 80% of the results? And focus your marketing there. Focus on that 20%. Now, I'm no longer doing career coaching, but when I was doing that, I got about 80% of my clients from speaking. So I spent most of my time focusing on speaking, and I didn't worry about the rest of it. In fact, my website was sorely outdated for years. 4 years. I started off as a blog, and then I started a business, and I didn't really change or redesign my website, but it was okay because I got most of my clients from speaking. So I didn't need to be spending a lot of money and time trying to have this big fancy website. And chances are you might not need that either, right? It depends, like, how are your clients finding you? And, is that going to be your 20% that's going to get you the 80% of results? So the marketing is one piece. And speaking of websites, that's another thing. When a lot of businesses get started, like, we try to check all the boxes, and like, website is one of the big boxes because websites can be very expensive to build. And, it may or may not be something that is important for your business. I mean, you want to have some kind of web presence, absolutely. But oftentimes, you don't necessarily need to spend as much money on it as you're getting started as you might think that you do. And it really depends on, again, your 80-20, right? Like, are your clients Googling for what you do a lot? Because if they are, it makes way more sense to spend the money and the time on a website. But if you do the kind of work with people, and I imagine, Valerie, you're probably in this place a little bit too, where people probably aren't Googling to find you.
Not for a while. It wasn't for a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, I have been there.
So not that a website isn't important to have at all, but maybe not the most important thing for you to focus on. So that's how you can start to whittle down, like, what are the things that are really important that are going to get me the biggest results? Now, my next tip is around really clarifying your why and then saying no to everything else. And before I get to that, I'm giving you a little tidbit of where we're going with this, because I'm going to talk about saying yes and saying no. And so again, when we're talking about that 80-20 rule, it's not even just that I want you to focus on that 20% that's going to yield the most results in your business. It's also that I want you to start saying no, whether that's to yourself or to other people, to things that are outside of that, to things that may end up just being a distraction in your business or giving you more to do and may yield a tiny gain, but aren't necessarily going to yield a huge gain. So I want to pause really quickly, because this is how I like to roll, and it's a little different doing it virtually, but I want to check in with Valerie and see, are we getting any questions or comments in the chat or in the Q&A?
There's kind of a consensus, like, how do you even, and it just popped up, how do you avoid that kind of stuff, though, in the first place? The stuff that maybe is a distraction, even though you're being pulled in, like, people are asking a lot of you, but it's maybe not the best use of your energy and time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, knowing what that 20% is a good first guideline for that. And I'm going to dive more into that specific question in the next tip that I'm going to give you. Is there anything else that's coming up for people? Okay, great. So let me go ahead and dive more into this next tip, because I think this is going to be really relevant for you based on what we're seeing in the chat and the questions that you're having. So the next thing that I have for you, other than the first one being using the 80-20 rule, and the second one being really know your why and saying no to everything else. Okay, so what are we really talking about? What does that mean? And when I say know your why are you doing this? Why are you an entrepreneur? Why do you have this business? Why does it matter to you? What were those principles or values that being an entrepreneur represents to you? For many of us, it's freedom of our time. For many of us, it's the autonomy. For many of us, it's getting to be more creative. What are those things for you that motivated you to want to become an entrepreneur? You already know what those things are. And so I want you to be really clear about what that is. Like, what kind of life and what kind of business are you trying to create for yourself? Why are you even doing this in the first place? And why would you do a bunch of things that are not going to align? So if you started a business because you really value the personal freedom that comes from being an entrepreneur, then I want you to know that. And if you are getting requests, like Valerie was talking about, some of you are commenting in the Q&A and in the chat, if you're getting requests for things that don't align with why, not just the what you do, right? Because there's the what you do. And a lot of people might say they might have good advice or good suggestions or even like be throwing opportunities that are actually aligned with what you do, but it may not be aligned with why you are doing it. And it may not be aligned with your 80-20, right? You might get an invitation to participate in some kind of event, and that might not be part of your 20% that gets 80% of the results. Again, that's another great thing to say no to.
Something just popped up, and you may want to get into it a little later, but somebody said, what timeline should we expect when planning that new alignment as an entrepreneur to show promise? And what are the early warning signs that I chose the wrong path?
Ooh, early warning signs that I chose the wrong path. This is a great question. And I really want you to lean into trusting yourself a little bit more than maybe that you're comfortable with right now. A little bit more than maybe you do already right now. And this is something, one of my chapters in my book is believing in yourself more than you believe others. Because here's the thing, a lot of people are going to have opinions about what, how, and why you should run your business. And they're going to have a lot of opinions about the best strategies and the best methods, and I've got the answer to success. And you follow my 5-step plan, right? And I want you to be in a space to trust yourself, to know, not just does what they're saying sound good, but does it feel right to you? Does it feel right with those things that you value, with that why? Does that feel right? And so I think that is really the starting point because, earlier on in your business, there's going to be a lot more learning that you're going to be doing. And maybe you're going it on your own and you're learning that way. Or maybe you even have consultants or coaches around you. And there's a lot of great consultants and coaches around you, or could be. And there's a lot of coaches and consultants that may or may not really understand the nuances of your business. But that's how being aligned with your why can help provide clarity, because it can help be that space where you start to say, does this feel right for where I'm at? Is this going to help me achieve the things that I'm trying to achieve in business that are most important to me? So I think that's a starting point, is that knowing and then that trusting yourself. But it's easy for me to stand up here and talk to you about saying no, and it is so much harder to actually do it, right? Yeah, I have a lot of practice at this, and I still am learning how to say no. And so I'm going to start with first when to say no. So you know what your purpose is, you know what your why is in your business, and that's awesome. But I want to give you a couple other tools around when to say no. And so I want you to start thinking about saying no if you are unwilling or unable to agree to something that is being asked of you. So unwilling or unable. That sounds pretty simple, so let's break it down a little further. What does unwilling look like? Well, first of all, you might be unwilling to agree if it doesn't align with your why. If it's not going to help create that lifestyle that is the reason that you became a business owner in the first place. So you might be unwilling. Let's think, or what are some other reasons you might be unwilling? Well, you might be unwilling because maybe you are a parent and you value spending time with your kids. And you're being asked to do things that interfere with the activities that you have planned with your kids. You might be unwilling to agree. And if you're unwilling, it doesn't matter how good or enticing the opportunity is. Or even, I'm going to say, it doesn't even necessarily matter how much result you're going to get for it if you are truly unwilling to do it. So I'm going to give you an example of what that might look like in practice. So I was giving a version of this talk up in Fort Collins several years ago, and there was a woman in the audience who was a bookkeeper. And she had this client who insisted on meeting in person every month, and he was in Denver. So she was driving about an hour and a half each way once a month to go visit this client. And so she asked me this question during my talk, and she said, so I have this client, he's in Denver, I'm driving like 3 hours a month to go see him in person. And, it's really important to me to spend time with my son when he gets home from school. And the thing is that I find that this client is just eating into the time that I'm spending with my son. So her question to me was, should I be charging for that travel time to and from Denver? And I said, absolutely not. And I could tell that was not the answer she was expecting. And I said, you just told me you don't want to be driving to Denver and spend 3 hours in the car because it's cutting into the time that you're spending with your son, and that's what you value. So why would you want to get paid to do something you don't really want to do? I would rather see you not do it than to get paid to do something you don't want to do. Even if it's lucrative, even if he agrees to paying you for this travel time, you don't want to do it. So I asked her, I said, well, what about telling him that you're not going to drive to Denver anymore? And she said, well, I might lose him as a client. And I said, yeah, I have to be honest with you, that could happen. I can't promise you that that won't happen. But if you let go of this client that is asking you to do something you don't want to do, now you're open to take on a client who is more aligned with what you want to do. So I could tell she was a little nervous, maybe a little skeptical, and was like, okay. And the thing is, about 3 or 4 months later, I ran into this woman at a networking event, and she came rushing over to me, and she was so excited. She was like, Krista, you'll never believe what happened. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to hear. She said, that client that I was driving to Denver, I told him that I could no longer drive down to Denver once a month to meet with him, and now he drives to Fort Collins. These results are not guaranteed, but they're possible. They are possible. So she was unwilling to drive. And that meant that that was a great thing for her to say no to. Now, what does it look like to be unwilling to agree to a request that's being made of you? Well, that was unwilling, but unable. What does it look like to be unable to agree to a request that's made of you? Well, being unable can look like you don't have the resources. Maybe you don't have the expertise. Maybe you don't have the time. When I say resources, I'm including like your time resources, your money resources, your knowledge resources. Maybe you are unable to agree because you're already overcommitted to other things. So I want you to be really honest with yourself. Am I willing and am I able to agree to this opportunity, to this request, to whatever it is that someone is asking of you? And maybe they're not asking. Maybe it's just an opportunity that comes up. Like, you could pursue this. And just like my client that I talked about in the beginning, she had young kids at home, so it actually would have really been very hard for her to work full-time, have 2 young kids at home, and go to school. I mean, people do it, but it would be hard. It would be a challenge. And maybe she wasn't truly willing or truly able to even do that. So saying no when you are unwilling or unable, that's a great place to start. So I'm going to check in. Are we getting any comments about this?
No, but I actually have a question.
Yes, I love it.
Maybe it's misguided and at a wrong time, so let me know. What I found as an entrepreneur, especially with COVID, and as an employer who really needed to make payroll because I'm an employer, when the pandemic first started, we were, like everybody, we were terrified. And luckily for us, it ended up working out okay. But what do you do as an entrepreneur when you are unwilling, but technically able, and you must?
So tell me more. What does must mean?
Maybe a customer demand where it would, where I was completely not willing for, various reasons. It wasn't, and luckily wasn't an issue of ethics or anything like that, but I was unwilling, I was exhausted, barely able because everybody's overworked and
Mm-hmm.
especially in the past year and a half. But what do you do when you're unwilling, but you're technically able and you just have to do it? What's the best What's the best way to move forward and then maybe try not to repeat it again?
Yeah, I mean, did you have to do it though?
In the moment, I at least felt that I
Or did
did.
it, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Did it feel like I have to agree to this, or did you actually have to?
I think it was yeah, and so I think in the moment the numbers at least suggested that I did.
Yeah, yeah. So it felt like if I say no, I mean, but it wasn't actually life or death.
Not of my personal life or death, but I think I think that entrepreneurs are so obsessed with doing right by their team, things
Yeah,
like that,
yeah.
we do sometimes really feel that, instead of that word feel.
Yeah.
But then we were like, well, what if I don't do this? Then like the alternative is completely not okay.
But you don't know what would have happened if you had said no. I mean, it ended up working out all right, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But what if, can you hold space for the possibility that you could have said no and it still could have worked out? Is that a possibility?
Technically, as I did not suss it out. Yeah, so that's interesting insight.
Yeah. I mean, it could have still worked out in some way. And you don't necessarily have to know how it might work out for it to work out.
Very interesting.
And here's the thing about agreeing when you are unwilling or unable. So sometimes we do it. We all do it to an extent. But it taxes our resources and it stresses us out and it burns us out. And if you're someone with a chronic illness of some kind, for example, this is going to put you in dangerous territory to say yes when you are unwilling or unable, or you're both unwilling and unable, right? If you're willing to share, I mean, it's okay if you're not, but if you're willing to be a little vulnerable, what was the cost to you personally to go ahead and do this thing that you were unwilling to do?
So it depends on how, so again, murky boundaries as an entrepreneur. And I think I probably speak for a lot of, especially like founders who are monetized and tech, especially tech founders. The cost to me personally was for sure what you said just blew up, resonated extremely, with the taxed my, the spoon theory of it.
Yeah.
I live with chronic illness like many Americans and many entrepreneurs do, and it's a forbidden subject to talk about. But it did personally. The cost to me was time with my family, time with my my interests. I have many interests outside of my work, but then I also, there's this pressure of cost to me in the startup economy. How does this look to employees? How does this look to my colleagues, kind of thing? So it's very multifaceted.
Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely is. And again, there's no guarantees that it's always going to work out if you say no, but there's no guarantees it's going to work out if you say yes.
Right.
Because how I got started talking about work-life balance is I had myself so stressed out and so overworked and overcommitted that I had a series of health issues. I had 7 surgeries in 6 years, and I got shingles when I was 35. And it was just one thing after another, after another, after another. And guess what? Like, I was forced to take time off for surgery. I was forced to take time off for illness, whether I wanted to or not, because my body was just like, no, you cannot do anymore. So, we might tell ourselves the story as we might feel like, I can't say no to this. But chances are, if you don't actually have the resources to do it, or you're truly unwilling, you're going to pay for that in some other way. And here's the thing, no matter what you do in life or in business, you are going to disappoint someone. No matter what you do, you are going to disappoint someone. And is that person going to be you? Because here's the thing, when we say yes, when we're not in integrity with that yes, We're almost always saying no to something else, even if it's by default. Like, we're not consciously thinking, I'm going to say no to my health. I'm going to say no to time with my family. I'm going to say no to all these other things that I might want to do. We don't think of it that way. But for most of us, every single opportunity you say yes to, there is something else that you are unable to do because you've agreed to do this other thing. Do you agree with that, Valerie?
100%.
Yeah. Yes. Right. And so, we don't want to say no because we don't want to disappoint people, or we are afraid that there's going to be some backlash. The client will fire us, or we won't be able to make payroll, or whatever the situation is. Right. But the thing is there's always going to be something that comes off your plate, whether you intend it to or not. So why not say yes and say no with way more integrity and up front? No, if I agree to this, then what am I willing to give up? What's coming off my plate? What am I not going to do? Because there's always going to be something. And you're always going to disappoint someone no matter how hard you try not to disappoint people ever. And so I want you to be really clear and in integrity with yourself about who you disappoint. Would I rather disappoint a client than disappoint a family member? I mean, when it comes down to it, the fear is but that client pays my bills. But there's more than one client. There's more than one opportunity coming in your pipeline. I worked for a small business for many years before I was an entrepreneur, and I absolutely loved working for this small business. It was one of the greatest teams I've ever worked with, great people at this organization. And the industry started to shift and change, and then this was right before 2008. And of course, there was this big recession in 2008. So even leading up to the recession, this particular business, the industry was really changing quite rapidly, and we were struggling to keep up. And then we started getting into the early stages of the recession, and the owners did not want to lay anyone off. Because Valerie, you mentioned payroll and your employees, and they did not want to lay anyone off. And they were just like, our team is so important to us. This is really important to us to not lay anyone off. But here's the thing. Everyone ended up getting laid off eventually anyway. And we were all coming to work so stressed out because we knew that this was a potential. And I mean, the way that it happened was not very strategic. And guess what? Here's the thing. I'm not suggesting you go lay off all your employees. That's not what I'm saying at all. But there are protections for employees. Employees get unemployment. There's programs to help them. What programs are out there to help entrepreneurs who can't make their rent? Yeah, those programs don't exist, do they? There's not the same protections in place for us as business owners that there are for the employees. So I'm not saying screw your employees, but I'm saying that fear of what am I going to do? I don't want to have to let my employees down. And it's right, but be really clear for yourself, because sometimes you might let them down. And even that company that I worked for, they didn't want to let any of us employees down. They didn't want to lay any of us off or make any changes, to our schedules or anything. And it ended up happening anyway. And in the process, both of the owners lost everything. They lost their houses. They lost everything trying to keep the business afloat, just so that they didn't have to take that step that they had to take eventually anyway when the business closed down.
I feel that.
Yeah, right. So if every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else by default, know what that is up front and know if you're okay with that. Be clear for yourself if you're okay with that. The guideline of saying no if you're unwilling or unable to agree, that's just a guideline. So just really think about it. Am I willing to agree to this? Am I able to agree to this? If I say yes to this, what is not being done? What am I sacrificing? And am I okay sacrificing that thing? Because oftentimes that thing that you're sacrificing is a known, whereas the fear of what might happen is an unknown. And it may or may not turn out that way at all. Just like that bookkeeper who didn't want to drive to her clients, and she was afraid, well, if I say no to driving to Denver, he's going to find a different bookkeeper. But that's not even what happened. And so many of us, our brains would go to that place, right? Well, if I'm not doing what my client wants me to do, they're going to fire me and find someone else who will. Not necessarily. He valued that relationship with her. He valued her service. So he was willing to drive up with her to her because it was important for him to meet in person. So we've talked a little bit about when to say no, and I want to talk a little bit about how to say no, because here's another thing. It's a lot easier to think about saying no and a little bit more challenging to do it. So the first thing is, no is a complete sentence. I want you to really avoid justifying your no, especially with clients, and that's going to feel hard. Because we have this idea in our head, I think most of us, that if I give a good explanation, then they're going to be okay with me saying no. And maybe they won't be quite as disappointed, or maybe they won't be mad if they can understand where I'm coming from. And sometimes that's true. But here's the other thing that happens when we justify why we're saying no. First of all, we create this expectation for ourselves and for others that it's only okay for you to say no when I can give you a reason that you are going to agree with. But guess who has to deal with whoever's disappointed if you don't say no? Whatever that sacrifice is, whether that sacrifices your health and wellness, whether that sacrifices your family, whatever that sacrifice is, right? Who's going to have to deal with the consequences of that? You are. Not that other person. So they don't need to agree with your reasoning. They don't need to agree with your reasoning. And most of the time, we sound more clear when we set boundaries without over-explaining them. And so I invite you to stop explaining them, because it's like a really fine line to try to not over-explain. But I want to give you an example, too, about a situation that maybe you have come across very commonly, okay? Whether you were the person making the request or the person saying no. So let's say your coworkers invite you out after work to go to happy hour, but you have to pick up your kids at school and take them to their various activities. So the first response of saying no, you might have said something very similar. You might have heard something similar from someone that you know. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for the invitation. That sounds really fun, but I just can't tonight because first I have to drive home and pick up Tina, and then I have to drop her at ballet. And then Bobby's softball practice gets over at 4, and I have to pick him up, drive him across town, and drop him off at his next activity. So it's just not going to work out. Maybe you've said something like that. That's a very socially acceptable, I think, sort of ramble about why you might turn down an invitation to go to happy hour. But let me put it to you another way where I don't justify or explain why. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm not able to come tonight. I hope you ask me again. Which of those two examples sounds more confident and self-assured? Most of us are going to agree the second one sounds more confident and self-assured. Even though same scenario, same person, the only difference is I haven't explained and given you this like long laundry list of what I'm going to be doing instead of going to happy hour. And here's the thing. When you don't give an excuse, when you sound confident, when you sound self-assured, the thing is that people start to value your time more. They start to value your time more because the more you value your time and your resources, the more other people value it as well. And here's the other thing. When people know that they can count on you to say yes or say no and follow through, people are willing to pay you more. Absolutely. People are willing to pay you more when they know that you're only going to say yes when you can get in there and do an amazing job for them. And that you're going to only say no when you know you can't step up. If they know they can trust your no because you're unwilling or unable to follow through, then they're going to trust you more and they're going to value you more because you're valuing yourself more. Does that track? Are there any comments coming in?
There are, and it's just about time for questions. And I think that there's two really amazing ones that might need a little bit of a detailed answer. So I think it's a great segue if you're good with that.
Yeah.
So the first one is being an entrepreneurial, quote unquote, partner. Does that lessen the stress versus being a solo entrepreneur in your mind?
Great question. I don't think there's less stress. I just think it looks different. I just think it looks different because there's stresses with navigating a partnership in business and there's stresses with, doing it on your own. So I just think it looks different.
Yeah, I've done both. It's just like choose your hard. Like anything else, it's just every situation is really, really different.
And what hardness are you more able to tolerate?
Right? For me personally, just due to the nature of my startup as a tech startup, deep tech startup, very like really, really smart people. I work with really, really smart people. I do not come from a technical background. And so it was an absolute must for me to have technical co-founders. Mm-hmm. And at first that was very hard for me because I'm actually educated as a teacher. I did have some MBA, education and deferred that once my business monetized. But I grew just like with every other situation. And for me, I say I couldn't do it another way, but for me, right now it's very amazing for me to have a multiple people co-owning the business and being on the board with me. Mm-hmm. It's grown me as a person, especially in the pandemic. So I enjoy having multiple founders with me and partners.
Yeah. I think it just depends, right? They're equally hard, and you just choose what am I more able to tolerate and what am I more able to tolerate right now, because that might shift and change over time.
Sure, and you get more opinions. The more people you have, the more the opinions you get. Mm-hmm. And then when you're on your own, you really want those opinions. It's human nature to kind of want what we don't have. I think sometimes just because we start missing it. So. Yeah. And then the next question is, what's the recourse when your client presses you on your no? And they put explanation, but I think it could either be on your no or your no explanation.
Yeah, absolutely. So if someone is trying to pressure you for an explanation, be wary of that person. I don't know the details of this situation, but I would say be wary of that person, because people that try to push your boundaries typically will continue to try to push your boundaries and push a little more and push a little more and push a little more, right? And so I would definitely be wary of someone who does try to push your boundaries or pushes you for an explanation. And here's the thing, if you're willing to share your reason, you can, but that doesn't mean they're going to accept it. It doesn't mean they're going to agree with it. But you don't have to share your reason if they're pushing you. If you haven't given a reason and they're pushing you on it, you are absolutely allowed to say, I don't care to discuss this with you further. I'm not willing to do this, or I'm not able to do this right now. And they might get mad. And that's okay. Can you be okay with someone getting mad? Right? It might feel uncomfortable, but you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine, I promise. And if somebody is bringing that energy to the table, those are the nightmare clients. Those are the clients, the ones that are always like pushing your boundaries. Those are the clients that are honestly never really that happy, even when you're going above and beyond and bending over backwards. And then they've always got something they're either unhappy about or they want more. And then you start spending more and more of your resources trying to keep these unhappy, cranky clients in place. And all these amazing, awesome clients that you have are like sitting out there and they're just happy. But you could be going out finding more clients like that. The ones that aren't stretching your resources, that aren't demanding more and more and more of you. So you don't owe anyone an explanation, and if they're going to push you on it, you certainly can tell them. They may or may not like it. They're going to feel however they're going to feel about it, but you don't have to give them an excuse. You can say, I'm not willing to discuss this further. Boom, mic drop. I'm not actually going to drop this mic, though. Other questions that are coming in?
There's actually one from another panel that we just ran out of time, but I think that it's highly applicable to this to this presentation as well. Are there any local support groups for entrepreneurs?
That's a great question. Local support groups for entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of different types of entrepreneur groups out there, both local and online. And you can get some support. It's not really a support group, but you can get support through some of those different kinds of organizations. Some of them are like networking groups, and sometimes they have the capacity for you to engage and kind of get into masterminding situations. I love a good mastermind group for a place to bounce ideas off of other entrepreneurs. It's not really a support group, but to talk about, these are the real challenges that I'm facing in my business. How have you dealt with this? What did you do when something like this happened? How have you said no when a client got angry and this happened? How should I respond? I mean, sometimes those can be very powerful. So there's a lot of different groups like that out there. Certainly in the area that you can go and try to find. I know as the leader of She Goes High, we are an introvert-focused women's leadership organization, and that's honestly a lot of what we do. We're not focused on entrepreneurs. We are focused on women leaders of all kinds. But absolutely, within our organization, we get a lot of that. It's an opportunity for us to come together and to talk about the challenges of being a woman leader and what does that look like, and support each other and show up for each other. And so there's She Goes High, which is focused on the Northern Colorado area, and I'm sure there are other groups as well. So I invite you to start looking around, come to events like Longmont Startup Week. There are in-person events that are happening this week. Great place to meet people. And you can start asking them, where do you go? What groups do you like to attend? Or you can go out and find some maybe on Meetup or start one. If the niche that you're looking for doesn't exist, create it.
100%. And there are a couple questions flowing in and comments, and I'll say that in just a second. But I would like to pile on one really awesome thing about Longmont, if you're new to the Longmont startup ecosystem, is the events are amazing, whether it's through Longmont Startup Week or the virtual stuff. We're here for you guys. Like, I would not be here if it weren't for people helping me too. And so what I've noticed about the other business owners here and entrepreneurs, startups, and people not from startups, just if they're doing business, and in the Fort Collins area too, we have a really nice, inclusive, amazing community. And so really just talk to people, go up to somebody and start talking. And if they don't want to talk to you, which is extremely rare, they just won't. But what I found, the vast majority of people here have been helped, and so we want to help. That's why we're here presenting today. It's a great time to be a startup founder in Longmont. And so some comments. This is great. Really resonates with me for a lot of reasons. I will second that. And so the person asking the question also says, how do you effectively tell your family no? And we're at 3 minutes before wrap up. He says, background. A lot of time goes into forming a startup. There is a balance. Children do not often understand, as well as spouses.
Oh, man, that is so true. Partners, no matter how supportive they are, if they are not also an entrepreneur or don't have that entrepreneurial spirit, partners are the hardest ones when they don't understand. A lot of family members won't understand. And, this is a tricky thing, but I think it really just comes down to, especially if someone truly cares about you, going back to that knowing your why. Because if you know your why, you can share that with your partner. Kids are not going to necessarily understand that as well, but you can share that with your partner. You can paint that vision for your future together. Because if you have a partner in your life, chances are whatever that why is for you, your partner is part of the life that you're trying to create, in your vision, in your desire. Your family is part of what you're trying to create. So can you share that vision with them? Can you bring them into it? And maybe you negotiate and say, okay, I understand that I'm asking you to step up a bit more while I'm focusing on getting this business started up. And I want you to know I appreciate the effort that you're putting into this. And if they're really reluctant, possibly you can even get them to agree to some terms, like, okay, how about this? If they're just like really not on board, say, okay, would you be willing to stick with it as I try this for, 2 years, 3 years, right? And can you create some kind of agreement with them that you're getting their buy-in on your idea or what you're trying to do? Where you're saying, listen, this is the vision. This is why I'm doing this. And here's where you fit in this. And I want to share this life with you. And I hope that you can be on board with me about it. Kids, a little harder, but also kids, to some extent, they're not always going to understand why we do the things that we do. And they still need to just go along with it, right? And make the most of the time that you do have with them. So when you are with your kids, put the business aside, put the phone down, set all of that away and allow yourself to be present with your family when you're with your family, and when you're in your business, being present to your business.
Very, very good. Krista, this has been so informative for me personally as a Longmont startup founder. Those of you in the audience, I hope that you have been as just amazed by this as I have. Just thank you so much. What a beautiful exclamation point for this sentence that is day one. That is refresh. We all need to refresh, and we cannot recalibrate until we are refreshed. And so I hope that you will join us tonight at Whidbey Brewing, 209 Emery Street here in Longmont, starting at 4. Looks like that's in just a little bit over an hour. There will be music, there will be craft brews, prizes, and favorite Longmont folks, sponsors. Thank you so much. I can already tell this week is it's already been amazing just for Monday. The rest of the week is great. We have tomorrow starting at 8:30, just like each morning. There will be morning motivation with Beth Smith. She's the Sticker Giant CEO. We also have of particular interest, I believe, to some of the tech founders. The Future of American Entrepreneurship will be tomorrow from 9 to 10. Seth Levine and Elizabeth McBride will be presenting on that. There were also, it was mentioned on one of the panels earlier today about diversity and inclusion, how important that is. That will be at 1 o'clock tomorrow with several folks from the Latino Chamber of Commerce and the U.S. Department of Labor and others. You'll really want to tune into that. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody who's participated in day one. I'm so fired up. I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and I hope that I'll see you all around. Thank you again, Krista, and everybody have a great evening.